everybody. Mike, Tim, Carl, John, Erie.
It's like all the
Stafford.
disciples are present.
Indeed. There are either two of us with three names or six of us with one name.
And what was his favorite disciple, his most beloved? Carl.
Carl.
Carl the disciple.
Well, yeah. Carl was such an unpopular name. He just called himself the disciple who Jesus loved. That was just easier than Carl. Carl was my dad's name, my grandfather's name. It's Big Nate's middle name. It's stuck. Dude, it's here. And for the socialists out there, I want to make sure it's Carl with a C. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Just to be.
Let's distinguish Mr. Marks.
Yeah, very clear on this. I've got some greetings. Phil Vischer and I were texting this morning from of the Holy Post fame. VeggieTales before that, a little thing called VeggieTales. I don't know if you've heard it. Tim, by the way, Tim Stafford sent me a picture of the tomato and the cucumber before deconstruction, and then after deconstruction, they're cut up into a salad. So
yes.
that was great. But Phil, he said, tell your audience I say hi, and that I applaud them for making it through the first 65 episodes of your latest series. And tell Tim his hair is boring. So I don't need to, because Seth Erie has rendered that judgment. How warm is it? Just real quick weather question. It's like 100 degrees here in Nashville.
It's up there today, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So we in California, the way I always map it is we have summer, false fall 1, summer 2, false fall 2, summer 3, and then we'll get fall. So we just had a false fall last week, and it was like low 60s, rainy. It was really nice. And then all of a sudden it just jumped right back up to 100. Or we're in the high 90s today.
Because Halloween is your favorite holiday, have you started thinking yet about?
I think all year.
Okay, well, what's the costume this year? Have you given
that's
it
the
much
problem
thought?
is we think about it for so long so the whole family, we went and saw the last 2 Ghostbuster movies in the theater. And so Mazzy has been very excited about being a Ghostbuster. Elliot got really excited about being Napoleon Dynamite because we screened that for the first time.
Nice.
But then I was sending Shauna, I was just like, what if we just did like really good, like goth, like no actual character, but just like a really nice outfit and get real gothy for Halloween. So we might do that.
Okay. I love that. Seth Erie just announced he wants to be a rock star. So
here he is.
I'm like, too late. Yeah. I mean, just wear what you normally wear then.
Mission
I don't know.
Accomplished.
Right? We got an email in that I thought was perceptionally. How about exceptionally perceptive? Or perceptionally?
I always feel like if you can use it in a sentence and it works. And that's professor.
Yes. Yeah. So this person sent in a wonderfully kind email addressed to hello Seth, Seth's dad, and Seth's boring-haired friend, which I love. And they say some nice things. And then I'm writing to ask you a question that I think relates. Sorry about my voice, by the way. I think I've had COVID. It's been a couple of weeks.
It was really bothering me. And
it started squeaking. I could hear it. I could hear it just kind of like puberty all over again. I'm writing to you a question that I think relates to both of your discussions as therapy, as well as what it means to be human. I have a history of recurring major depression throughout my life. It comes and goes with different phases of life. It has mostly just stayed over the last 5 years. Counseling with many different counselors hasn't made a dent. This is something that I've had to battle 10 times as hard since becoming a parent, as simply checking out and sleeping all day is no longer an option. Amen to that. Alongside lethargy and despair, I have increasingly found my depression coming through fierce anger when confronting my very normal kid shenanigans.
Yeah.
Time and again, I've repented. I've confessed to fellow believers, tried to do deep spiritual work of prayer, fasting, seeking mentors in the faith. While things seemed to get better, I was still constantly battling my anger. Then I went on antidepressants 3 years or so ago. The anger just evaporated. I wasn't depressed anymore. It felt great. But whenever I try to wean myself off of the antidepressants, whether for a couple of days or even most recently for a whole year, the depression and anger come immediately flooding back and seem to just get worse and worse. I feel so spiritually confused over this. I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to get off this medication. And if so, what does that mean about me spiritually? That I can't grow and find the sanctification to overcome my anger and despair? Is it truly human and abiding in who God is to rely on medication in order to not be consistently battling anger? Or is it just taking the easy way out and avoiding an opportunity for hard-fought spiritual growth? Most sincerely, a non-depressed and somehow guilty about that listener.
Oh,
What an email. You could see why that rushed to the top of, we need to respond to this. And standard disclaimers apply. Neither Tim nor I are mental health professionals. We're not even qualified to be pastoral counselors. We're just two schmucks learning and growing about ourselves in midlife. And so all of this is qualified as very much our opinions on this. Having given that disclaimer, however, let me say in the most absolute terms that totally contradict the disclaimer I just gave you.
Yeah.
There is nothing wrong with your faith to feel this way.
Yes.
And let me say this 100%. There is nothing wrong with you spiritually. There's nothing wrong with you humanly. The fact that in a fallen world, we need help, whether that's through the exercise, diet, sleep, friends, family, medication, therapy. That is what it means to be human in a fallen world. And relying on God is not opposed to seeking help elsewhere. So like when Paul says to Timothy, and just in this offhanded comment, like, hey, Timothy, you've been sick a lot, so drink some wine, dude. Stop just drinking water. So obviously he had some sort of intestinal deal, right? And he says to Timothy, dude, drink some wine, man. And
Timothy said, amen.
And Timothy, I don't know if Timothy started drinking more wine or not. I mean, obviously wine was what they had to drink back then. So he's not saying, hey, Timothy, get drunk and run away from your problems. But the issue in that instance wasn't Timothy's faith. He didn't say to Timothy, hey, bro, I really need you to pray and fast more about this illness that you've got going. He didn't say that at all. We have Luke, who is a physician, who's giving interesting diagnoses, throughout like the book of Acts and talking about viper bites and all of these sorts of things. Obviously, as a physician, he saw no disparity between his faith in Jesus and his occupation. Not only that, but we have Jesus directly, right? Yeah. I'm making some great points right now.
That was really good. I like that one.
Well, first of all,
gold star today, Mike.
Why do you sound surprised?
I don't. And then, I hadn't thought of that angle before. That was his. It wasn't that his vocation was somehow demeaned by being associated with Jesus. No, he was known as
the physician. Luke the physician. Yeah. Totally.
Dr. Luke.
Dr. Luke and Laura from General Hospital back in the day. Like that's a Gen X pull like nobody else. I'm going 20% of our audience gets that one. Now, so you have, and you also have, in Proverbs and in other places, like literally the recommendation of like medicinal drinking, for lack of a better term. There is not one verse in the Bible that says do not drink alcohol. There are loads of verses that warn against drunkenness, but it's almost as if God created the fruit of the vine for enjoyment,
Uh-oh.
Shocking. Not only that, but Jesus himself warns against drawing a conclusion from our physical maladies to our standing before God. He does this several times, most explicitly in John 9, when he comes across somebody who had been born blind, and the disciples, point out the natural, cultural, and religious teaching of the day, which is, well, who sinned, this man,
right,
or his parents? And Jesus says, neither, guys, but God is going to be glorified through this. So could Jesus heal your depression automatically and naturally? Of course he could. And he could heal the cancer or Tim's bad hair or my baldness. He could heal all of those things. But part of the culture making enterprise in Genesis 1 and 2 is that God loaded creation with things that help the human body.
Yeah.
Like from the very beginning, how it is that we eat, our need for sleep. So part of our humanness is that we need help.
Yeah.
We're not.
Or look at what are the two things we need to actually survive?
Food, drink,
Oxygen,
shelter,
and
water. Oxygen was what I was going to say next.
Are two very natural elements.
Absolutely. So that's one kind of biblical train of thought. Personally, I've tried to get off of my antidepressants 2 or 3 different times. When I first started antidepressants, I started on something called Lexapro. I gained 50 pounds in 6 weeks. Okay. And my doc said you can be skinny and have skinny and depressed, or fat and happy. And so I changed medication, but I've never been able to lose that core of weight. Now, my mouth and appetite have also had something to do with that. But I've tried multiple times to get off, and every time I try to get off, I just end up sobbing on the couch, unexplainably, just sobbing. And so I don't, and I've read the studies, not all of them, I'm no expert, but have said, hey, exercise is more effective. And man, I try to exercise. Or that in some cases, antidepressants are, they have a placebo effect. Hallelujah. All I know is that the anger that you have that's irrational and not proportional at all to a very normal life circumstance, if that anger goes away and allows you to be more fully present to God, your child, your family, or whatever else, yes. I don't understand how that would somehow be a lack of faith. The lack of faith, the more harmful lack of faith, would be kind of the Christian Science maneuver of saying, listen, none of this stuff is a substitute for God's direct action in my life. And so I'm just going to passively wait for God to fix it. I think part of what it means to be an image bearer is we have agency and autonomy in the world. And look at all of the things that you have tried. It's not like you just ran to a pill and had that fix it the first time. So I'm with you. I'm a lifer. In fact, this morning, I took my venaflexine. This is fluoxetine, 40 milligram capsules, holding it up. I probably shouldn't do that on the YouTube channel. And I actually use that as an occasion every morning to say, thank you, Lord, for the stability that I feel. My personality has not changed. But as my therapist said when I was terrified to start on these, he said, listen, it won't make a bit of difference if you don't need it, but it will raise the floor. So instead of barreling down into the abyss, for me, it was anxiety, not depression. There's a landing there that actually allows me to engage my faith and my humanity through therapy and other means much more effectively. So Tim and I are fans. We're fans. So I have an objectively biased opinion for why this is okay, because I've personally benefited. But I also see enough kind of drippings of biblical text to say, I don't think we should make any judgment about you spiritually other than you desperately want to grow and be close to Christ. Look at what all of you've done. How many people would just sit and stew in that anger and not do all of the work that you've done? Yeah. So if I'm going to make any judgment on you spiritually, the judgment I'm going to make is great job. Way to fight for this. And I'm sorry for whatever elements that have somehow planted themselves in your brain, or literally your own sense of shame or whatever, that has simply made a judgment about you for needing this. I don't like it either. I understand. I'd love to just be a guy who doesn't need prescription medication. Sure. I really would love that. But I need it for whatever reason. And it's been very, very helpful. Yeah. So anything, you're hugging yourself right now.
That's true. Gotta do some self-love.
Part of your sanctification to overcome your anger and despair is, I mean, part of the reason I actually got on medication to begin with was so that I could deal with the roots and not the symptoms.
Yes.
The symptoms are the anger or the anxiety or the depression. The roots are something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually got on because the research, at least that I read several years ago, was saying that medication, it has a certain degree of effectiveness. Talk therapy is a certain degree of effectiveness, but when you combine the two, there's a much greater degree of effectiveness.
Yeah.
And so all that is to say, I'm so sorry that you feel this way. And if there's any way that our words or tone of voice can convey what we think God thinks about you, I really hope that is true, because I think God is quite delighted in how much you fought for this. And this is it. Let's not worry about whether we're a lifer or not. Let's just be at peace today with and be grateful that it's not
Tomorrow has
hanging
enough
over you
worries
right
of
now.
its own.
That's it.
Somebody said once.
Somebody said that. Absolutely. Anything you want to add, my friend?
Yeah, nothing makes me more angry than people shaming or making folks feel less than for very human things.
Yeah.
I think that is anti-Christ.
Whoa.
Period. I really do. And it really bothers me. And I've seen that really, really tear people apart. Like,
yeah,
shame spirals into some really dangerous areas because they felt like they were sinning by trying to be healthy.
Yeah.
And they were made to feel that way by their church community or whatever. And that just really, 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 really bothers me, really makes me angry.
Yeah.
So
and
yeah,
you don't want to see Tim when he's angry.
You would not. Nope. It's very hulky.
Yes.
But yeah, I echo everything that Mike just said. And we obviously have been airing a lot of our dirty laundry with mental health, or clean laundry, or just our laundry. And it has been wonderful. And sometimes I do think we have seen that a lot of doctors don't know what they're doing when they're prescribing. And so sometimes that is the case where maybe you didn't need it, and there are other versions of exercise or diet or whatever, but there are so many cases where it is very necessary, just like lots of other things you get prescriptions for in life that help to heal your body when your body is not producing something or is hurt or whatever. And none of that gets demonized, but this whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps, young Christian, is a bunch of BS.
Yeah, which is in the biblical conception, which is the better expression of what it means to be human? Somebody who insists they can do it all themselves and they don't need help, or somebody who recognizes that they're limping and they need a bunch? And so,
I mean, that's almost what we just went through in Genesis, right?
I mean, we're still here.
But
we're still here.
That quote, which was from, who was it from? Your buddy in Irvine.
Irvana?
Never trust somebody that doesn't walk with a limp.
First of all, it's Dallas Willard. And second, that's Dave Gibbons. That's Dave Gibbons.
Right? Irvine or somewhere out there. Yeah. So but that's stuck with me. And I think that's true. And because we see that, I feel like we see it the most lately with these like large pastors who are falling from grace, is that there is a bravado and there's almost a lack of humanness in the position that they're holding. And so seeing people who are willing to struggle openly and be open and honest and ask for help when they need help and admit when they're wrong and all that kind of stuff is inspiring and very human.
Yes.
But also I wanted to say that the anger thing is something that I experience a lot in this department. And I think part of it is from just like pure exhaustion. Depression and anxiety just drain everything out of you, and it takes your patience and it takes all these things away with it. And so I'll find myself having a very short fuse with my kids, and my wife and I have a very good open communication about how, like, when like tapping out, like you're in, I'm out, when we can feel the other one drifting into like maybe unfounded anger or too quick to anger. But I do think that there's so much of this kind of stuff that drains you completely, like emotionally and spiritually, and makes you feel like an empty shell. And that can lead to anger and that kind of stuff. And I think that's a very normal, or I relate very much to that. And I feel very guilty and ashamed when it happens. And I spend the rest of my day while the kids are at school just like lamenting and toiling over how I responded to X, Y, and Z. But it is a symptom and not a causality. So it's getting into those roots and stuff, which sounds like this emailer is doing just that.
Yeah. Thank you for trusting us.
Good job.
Thank you for trusting us with this. My goodness, what an honor to be a part of a community that includes people like this. So, and it's interesting because we got this email, and then the same week I came across something on the tweets where the Surgeon General warns parents facing dangerous levels of stress. Did you see this?
No.
The U.S. Surgeon General is warning, and this seems legit, that parenting can be harmful for your mental health because mothers and fathers face dangerous levels of stress.
Man.
Yeah. In an advisory issued Wednesday, Dr. Murthy said he is blessed to be a father too, but notes how difficult he finds parenting for himself and others. The stresses that parents and caregivers have today. Yeah. In the advisory, Murthy said 41% of parents say most days they're so stressed they can't function. 48% say their stress is completely overwhelming compared to other adults.
Yeah.
Murthy argues that parents today are facing different challenges than from older generations, including social media, an increasing youth mental health crisis, and the epidemic of loneliness that impacts younger people and their parents. Earlier this year, Murthy pushed to require social media to have labels for its mental health impacts on young Americans. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And there's part of me, that's just like, well, no, duh. I mean, good Lord, of course. Really? This is where we're at. We need a Surgeon General to tell us it's stressful and hard on mental health. I mean, come on.
But yes.
But there also is, so I have 3 beautiful children. 2 of them are in college, and my parenting is like, when I went to college, it was kind of over in my generation. Like, you were 18, you could come home during summers and breaks, but you were essentially, you were on the hook for, my parents helped pay for college, which was a great gift. I had to pay some. So I worked all through college, but the expectation was that I wouldn't come back home and that I would be functioning as an adult from kind of 18 on. And I'm sure that still happens, but the between the economic pressures, the fact that college education ain't what it used to be in terms of getting a job, and the social media stuff, like, it's a much more serious game. I never, no one ever had to tell me about roofies and sexual assault and, all of those. So I think there's something to it. There's something to that. It feels a little different, but I also think that we also parent in ways that are really bad for our mental health. And we've talked about this, especially in Christian circles, where we're just behavior modifying. The goal of our kids is to be Christian and to be sinless. In other words, not to be human. And how crazy that is. And so we got this email, and then I saw that study, and then, I heard this warning, and then I saw a study that
busy morning.
Yeah, I don't know if this was all on the same day, but it published in the American Psychologist, July 25th of this year. And it was a meta-analysis that arguing, I mean, the point is that control leaves children worse off. Autonomy helps them engage, learn, and grow. So parental autonomy support was linked positively with child well-being, whereas parental psychological control, and I don't think they broke it out for religion, but certainly religion can be a form of parental psychological control. But control, regardless, was positively linked with child ill-being. Crucially, and this is something that, man, really stood out. The beneficial effects of parental autonomy support and the costs of psychological control applied across regions, degrees of national individualism and cultural hierarchy, meaning in collectivist and individualist cultures, as well as child developmental periods and sexes. The results help move the field beyond debates about whether autonomy is beneficial. It is. So autonomy is trusting your kids, not overly controlling them, giving them moral agency and decision making, being willing to live with their poor decision making, not rescuing and controlling, all the things we've talked about. And here, I mean, this couldn't be clearer. And I know there is a substantial number of our audience who are parents, because we heard from you when we brush up against this issue. But let's combine those three things together for a second. A Surgeon General saying, hey, mental health is jeopardized because of the unique challenges of parenting. A young parent who says, I have this irrational thing that is happening towards my children, or towards one of my children, or my child, or whatever. And then a study that says even the ways that we're parenting hurt us and the kids that we're parenting. You know what I mean? So you throw that whole mix together, and you get people absolutely yearning for some sort of formula about how to guarantee good kids. And you get loads of Christians who market themselves as parental experts, marriage experts. And it's like, you know, there's loads of money to be made selling a formula. And I just want to say, as far as I know, there is no godly way of parenting that is specified in detail that includes issues on, you know, when you let your kid go to bed, or how long should they rest between feedings, or whether they should sleep with you or not. Because all of this parenting stuff, the reason it's harmful for our mental health is because we're so afraid. And in the church, what we're afraid of is our kids rebel. They make us look bad. They're not going to heaven, you know, whatever. And so we engage in power over in ways that do not lead to their...
That we label as love.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what loving my neighbor looks like, is having the hard conversation to tell them they're terrible parents.
Yeah. Whatever it is. So
yeah, we talk about that in therapy quite a bit. And one of the things I was talking to my wife about this morning was she was we were having a conversation about like the Billy Graham rule kind of thing. And
the Billy Graham rule, for those of you that don't know, is that for him, he was never alone with a woman.
Right.
During his, I think ever, but particularly during his public ministry.
Like Mike Pence kind of brought that, the previous vice president brought that back into the national narrative. And what it does is obviously it can strip women of a lot of opportunities and a lot of, you know, agency and that kind of stuff, which is terrible. And I was talking to her about, you know, being raised in the 80s and 90s as a male, so much of our what we were told was that we can't control our sexuality, we can't control our urges, we can't control X, Y, and Z, and women can be seductresses even if they're not trying to, blah blah blah.
Right.
And you know, it took me until I was an adult to realize, oh, I have agency in this conversation, and I have a place to. And so we were talking about because our therapist said, you know, don't try to just redo everything, just on the ladder, try to go like one or two rungs up from the previous generation. Don't you're not going to be able to rewrite the entire whatever for us personally
parenting
playbook. We were talking about I was telling her about all those records that Caitlin Clark has been breaking, but how she's been so quiet and she's had so much criticism just because of her hype. She's a basketball player that's playing in the WNBA, and she came in with a lot of hype, but she's breaking these cool rookie records. And I saw a thing this morning of her being, this will all relate, I promise.
Dude, I'm loving
to
this.
Like Steph Curry and Damian Lillard, all these guys who are the best shooters in the NBA, and her distance from the basket is further than all of them for her average shot.
Oh, wow.
But she's quiet. Like she's not walking around like pulling all the hype in. She's breaking that ceiling for women, as that's a term that's being used again lately with the current presidential race. And Simone Biles, as somebody who chose mental health and then came back and got chastised to no end about being weak,
my Lord, yeah.
and all this stuff because she was choosing to take care of herself, then came back and killed, and has been able to hold this position as a woman of color in the international spotlight, and is killing it in how she has kind of held fast to herself and being healthy and advocating for other people's health. And so I was thinking about how, like, with Mazzy, with my daughter, like, she can have a spirit that can break you because it's so big, but it's going to be, and that would have been the way to have parented her in the past, would be like, know your place, be quiet, blah, 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 blah. Instead, we're trying to give her the tools to use that stuff in a way that will serve her so that she doesn't have to live with shame and anxiety and all these things about how she is made and built, and how to use it in a healthy manner and that kind of stuff. And so when I think about these conversations about like how much shame and guilt there is around how we parent, I was when you were just talking about like how much fear there is in parenting wrong. A lot of that fear, I don't think, is even about parenting your kids wrong. It's about being perceived as parenting your kids wrong, and the shame and the finger pointing that will come to you from people in your church, or people, like you said, that will write books about dating who have never been married, or will write books about raising children who have never raised children fully, but they have a platform to do so. I also just want to say, yesterday I had my kids. It was one of those days where I had my kids from like wake up until bed and all the sports and everything in between. And single parents are like the closest thing to divine that I can imagine. I don't know how you do it if you're out there, but it's I don't know. I just don't get it. And it's just, I'm in complete awe, and every word like that, I just cannot process or fathom how difficult that must be, how difficult it must be to navigate this conversation within that, with just being overwhelmed and feeling like you can't do all of the things, but still doing it every day and waking up and, putting your pants on and getting it done. I just, the unsung heroes of humanity are these parents that are somehow pulling it off. I just am in complete awe. But I thought about that with the parenting and the shame and the just the load that some people are carrying, and then feeling bad about their mental health within that is just like an unnecessary burden that we've heaped on folks. Yeah. So I hope the emailer feels encouraged to keep trucking, keep on keeping on. And anybody else that's also dealing with the same stuff, we're in a similar boat, and we're doing our best.
Yep. All right, timestamp that. 33 minutes. We're doing our best.
There's that quote in that movie Almost Famous when the kid's talking to Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. He's playing Lance Bangs, and he just says, "We'll all meet again on the long road to the middle." And I think about that all the time. Like
that's what all my calories say. As they're being ingested, we'll just that's awful. All right. So we also got a sweet piece of feedback about team banter, about our banter, and this person said, "Hey, it helps me trust you when you get to the Bible stuff, to know you."
That was
so we're doing it. We're gonna stay. That was the final nail. Banter.
That's what we needed.
In.
And I agree. As soon as you shared that email, I thought that is how I feel with things that I listen to as well. As I learn about them as human beings, and then when they start to speak, I feel a little bit more comfortable with whatever.
That's right. So
thank you.
Yep. So we'll timestamp that. All right, here we go. Part 66, according to Phil Vischer, for our current series. When last we left our heroes, they were naked and ashamed. And God,
which is now a reality show, isn't it? Or Naked and Afraid.
I don't even know. If it has naked in it, even Juice, I'm out. I'm fleeing. God speaks 7 It's kind of has 7 sort of things that God says. 3 of those are questions. We looked at all of this, and we closed with the idea that this section we're about to read, rather than seeing them as curses, because the serpent's the only one that get curses, is lament, and part of that's because the thing that God said to where are you? That's that word is the first word of the book of Lamentations, and so this is God's lament over the new normal, and so we're going to spend, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 episodes going over this because it has such explanatory power for what it is that Jesus is undoing when we get to the New Testament. So this series will not go on forever. We will shorten series and talk about other things, but man, this stuff is so juicy. So the question we're going to wrestle with, the first thing God does now that the humans are naked and ashamed, God is going to address the serpent. And we meet the serpent in chapter 3, verse 1. And so we want to ask the question, who's the serpent? And the judgments that are given to the serpent explain who the serpent is. So, reminder, Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 begins, "Now the snake was more shrewd than any living creature of the field which the Lord God had made." And grammatically, this could mean one of 2 things. Either the snake was considered a beast of the field and was simply different from the rest of them, or the snake, is that a plane?
It's a helicopter,
it's a helicopter,
like a big military guy.
Nice.
My house was rattling.
Yeah, dude, I love that. The zombies, bro. If we ever do get zombie attacks, we're gonna keep podcasting in the middle of it.
Absolutely,
it's gonna be. No
one will be able to listen to it, but oh wow,
correct. Is it still there?
There's another one. Those are big guys.
Oh, nice.
It's Revelation, man. Those are the giant locusts or grasshoppers or whatever.
Oh boy. Now, so the snake could be one of the beasts of the field and just different, or something else entirely different from the beasts of the field. This is the view that I'm going to argue for, that the snake is something other than what we think of when we think of a snake. Mm-hmm. The Hebrew word, and again, all disclaimers about Hebrew pronunciation, because I'm a total neophyte, but I'm going to pronounce it nakash. And what I'm going to say it with such confidence that most of us aren't even going to doubt it. A couple Hebrew scholars in the audience are going to go, "Dude, you're an idiot." But let me just acknowledge that from the outset. All right, so let's call it nakash. The word nakash is a very interesting word. It literally just means snake. And when you look at the ancient Near Eastern cultural context out of which Genesis arrived, snakes are all over the place. They're especially in Egypt, but literally in so much of ancient Near Eastern arts and iconography. It's absolutely crazy. If you just Google ancient Near Eastern, snake pictures, it's just
look
everywhere.
at where they discovered the Ark of the Covenant, full of snakes.
And he hates snakes.
Yeah,
snakes had a lot of symbolism in the ancient world. Number one, they were a symbol of disorder. They didn't fit neatly into the animal kingdom, right? They didn't have legs but could walk on land. They didn't have gills but could swim in water. They were kind of this in-between animal. And so snakes in the ancient world represented kind of chaos and disorder. They also, in a lot of religious traditions, they symbolize death and rebirth. So death through their poisonous bites, rebirth through the shedding of their skin. They also they came to symbolize inhabitants of the underworld realm, because they would go into holes and disappear. And so, in Egyptian art, man, snakes are absolutely everywhere. In Hebrew, this word nakash for snake also has those sorts of understandings, but it also is a word that doubled as the word for divination or witchcraft or sorcery, right? So in Deuteronomy 18, Moses says, when you enter the land your God is giving you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations that are there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination, and it's the word nakash, or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, who is a medium or a spiritist, or who consults the dead. In 2 Kings, in the 2 courts of the temple of the Lord, Manasseh built altars to all of the starry host. These are the lights that we meet in Genesis 1 that we find out are spiritual creatures, but he was worshiping them as gods rather than as created beings. He sacrificed his own son to the fire and practiced divination, nakash. So Genesis 3:1, in the ancient world, you wouldn't have at all been surprised to find a snake there in some heaven and earth space, because snakes were considered underworld dwellers or temple dwellers. You wouldn't have been surprised that some sort of boundary was being violated, because they were themselves symbols of boundary violation. And you would have had, even though the snake was shrewd, and that was a good word, the word that's used is also a word for divination, which represents kind of the bad kind of wisdom, which is so interesting because, again, the choice of the humans was between appropriate wisdom and inappropriate wisdom.
Yeah.
And the choice of the snake is between appropriate wisdom and inappropriate wisdom. So appropriate wisdom would have been staying in its lane and obeying the God-given role that it had inherited in its creation. Or the inappropriate wisdom of the snake was the divination, the trying to know the future. So you see this like wisdom theme playing all throughout here. So that's one clue as to the identity of the snake. Another clue comes at the end of Genesis 3, when the man and the woman get kicked out of the garden, and God places cherubs. They're not cherubs, they're cherubs, who are some sort of spiritual beings at the entrance to the garden. So Genesis 3:24, after God drove the humans out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden. Remember, Eden was a big territory, and the garden was at the center of Eden. He placed at the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. So you're like, okay, cherubim. Now, to the original audience, this was a word that they would have known and understood. And they're pictured in later writings in the Old Testament as spiritual beings who are described using different words. So cherubim, that's one way to describe them, and they're used here. But the big point in Genesis 3:24 is that it wasn't just God and humans, it was also spiritual beings that were there in the garden too. Now, these cherubs, or cherubim, plural, are described using a bunch of different words. The predominant way they're described is they're described as living creatures in Ezekiel and in Revelation. And they're multiform. In other words, they're made up of sky animals, sea creatures, and land animals. And they sort of represent all of the created animal world, including human, before the throne. And so, like, let me give you an example. In Ezekiel 1, very famous throne room scene. They always appear in throne room scenes, always, these beings. They're called cherubim in some places. They're also called living creatures in other places. In my 30th year, Ezekiel writes, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, while I was among the exiles by the Kebar River, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. And here's a throne room scene. I looked and saw a windstorm coming out of the north. An immense cloud was flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf, gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. All 4 of them had faces and wings, and on the wings, and the wings of one touched the wings of another. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Their faces looked like this. Each of the 4 had the face of a human being. On the right side, each had the face of a lion. Each had the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. And you're just like, okay, well, obviously these are symbolic creatures that have a lot going on. Yeah. Wings, hands, eyes, whatever. We meet these same creatures in Revelation, and they're called living creatures. In the center, around the throne, were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third had a face like a man. The fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under their wings. You're like, okay, weird, but okay, spiritual creatures. On brand. Yeah, spiritual creatures. Now, it's interesting. Isaiah uses a different word to describe these spiritual beings. Now, I'm not sure if these are all words describing the same being or if they're words used to describe different beings. I don't know. Yeah. There's a bunch of scholarship on that I have not yet accessed.
How did we get from that to the little guys that made our toilet paper and what were the little statues that we had when we were kids? Like the
precious moment, like
yeah,
the cherub, the cherubs. Yeah, dude, seriously. Again, the joke is always there's a reason why angels, the first thing they always say is do not be afraid. Right? There's a reason. Yeah. So Isaiah uses a different word, and it's the only place that this word is used and it's untranslated. So it's literally just the word. So let me read the section, and then the word is crazy. In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. So again, another throne room scene. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. So I'm thinking we're talking about the living creature still. With 2, he covered his face. With 2, he covered his feet. With 2, he flew. And they called out to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, and the whole earth is full of his glory. Now, what's so interesting is the word seraph, or the word seraphim, plural, is a word that's used everywhere else for venomous snake. So we meet a snake in Genesis 1 or Genesis 3:1. Here's a snake, and it's talking, which is so odd. And it has wisdom because it somehow is talking about the purposes of God and humans. Then we read in Genesis, at the end of Genesis, there were cherubs there guarding. Well, what are cherubs? Well, we think these are the living creatures that are described in all of the throne room scenes, right? But only one time are they called seraphim. And notice these seraphim have wings. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about, if you follow the breadcrumbs, it seems that we're talking about snakes with wings. All right? In Numbers 21, let me give you examples of where seraphim are used and translated venomous snakes. So Nakash just means snake. Seraphim is the deadlier snake. It's a venomous snake. So Numbers 21, Yahweh sent snakes, Nakash, venomous snakes, seraphim, among his people, and they bit the people. That's interesting. Okay. Deuteronomy 8, Yahweh led you into the great and terrifying wilderness of the snake, the venomous snake. Hebrew, seraph. Isaiah 14, do not rejoice, O Philistia, all of you, because the rod that struck you is broken. For from the snake, Nakash, from the snake, Nakash root, a viper will come out, and its fruit will be a flying snake, seraph. Bro. Now, if you Google flying snakes in ancient Near Eastern temples, you will be, I don't know, I probably have 10 different pictures saved on my hard drive of Egyptian, Assyrian, Canaanite art, sculpture, temple, iconography that are filled with flying snakes being around like the dwelling place of the gods. All right. So, and the reason I think what we're talking about is a spiritual being. All right. A, other spiritual beings were there. B, this is a talking snake, right? C, living creatures are described as creatures with wings, and they're actually called seraphim in one reference in Isaiah. But being a flying serpent would make sense of the judgment that God gives in Genesis 3:14, which is where we're picking up the story. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. And we've talked about how in Genesis 1, they were more wise than all the wild animals. Now they're the more cursed. The serpent is the most cursed of all the wild animals. So this is literally the fall of the serpent. And then here's the judgment. So this is God does not curse the man or the woman. God curses the ground and God curses the serpent. And we'll talk about that in a couple of episodes. But here's the judgment on the serpent. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust all the days of your life. That makes zero sense if we're talking about your regular garden variety snake, at what we know as a snake.
Right.
But it makes total sense if, as Revelation describes, the great dragon, okay? What's a flying reptile called? A dragon. When the dragon is cast down to the earth, and a word for earth there is the word dust. So what you get here is the casting down of a spiritual being into the animal kingdom. And I'm not saying that snakes are, every time you come across a gardener snake, you're looking at Satan himself or something. No. There's so much imagery being cooked here that is, dude, it's just channel it into my veins. It's so incredible. But the serpent has gone from an exalted position around the throne with God's wisdom to now the lowest of all the land animals, who crawls on its belly and eats dust. Now, the eating of dust is a symbol of humiliation. So in the book of Micah, another nation gets taunted. They will lick dust like a snake, like a creature that crawls along the ground, right? It was a taunt. The wolf in Isaiah, the wolf and the lamb will feed together. The lion will eat straw like the ox, and dust will be the serpent's food. Like the animal kingdom will all be unified in the Messiah's reign, but snakes will still eat dust. You know what I mean? So it's just this picture of utter humiliation. And you get this image, like when Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning. Or in Revelation, the great serpent is cast down. Like, I think these are all images treading on this judgment in Genesis chapter 3. So the first part of the judgment is the snake has been humiliated. It's gone from an exalted place to the lowliest place. But then you get this, which is, dude, again, put on your Indiana Jones National Treasure hat. The rabbit hole that this leads us down, which we're going to start exploring today, is so great. I will put enmity, which is sustained animosity between you, serpent, and the woman. Now, this is so interesting. And when we get to the lament over the woman, this is going to make more sense. But just hold off for a second. I'm going to put enmity between you and the woman, which is so weird. Between your seed and the woman's seed. So I'm going to put enmity between the two of you individually, but also your seed. And we're going to talk about that in a second. I will put enmity between your seed and her seed. He shall crush you on the head, and you will crush his heel. Now, this is called the proto-evangelion. This is the first hint.
Of course it is.
This is the first hint we get of, God's promising something here. So, enmity between you and the woman, we'll talk about that a little bit, between her seed and your seed. Now, and then the introduction of a he, a singular he, who will crush you, singular, on the head, and you, singular, shall crush his singular heel. So we go from singular to plural to singular again, right? And this is how the word seed functions even in English, right? So the word seed can be singular, plural. I planted a seed, or I got a bag full of seed, right? Unless we're referring to sunflower seeds, we rarely use the plural seeds. We talk about just a bag of seed, if you're a farmer. Or we talk about a singular seed. I planted a seed and it grew. So that the Hebrew word here functions the same way, although the plural is rarely ever used. So it's like the word offspring. Offspring can be a singular word or a plural word, but we never add the plural to it, offsprings, because the word itself can function both ways. This is what's happening in the Hebrew word that we translate seed or offspring. It can mean singular or plural. So between you and the woman, there will be animosity. Between your seed, plural, and her seed, plural, semicolon, he, singular, will strike you, singular, on the head, and you will strike his heel. So that's how the word can function. It's a word that can mean singular or plural, and it's employed both here. All right, that's notation number one about the word seed. The word seed most literally means offspring, physical descendants. And what's interesting is, can I think of any stories in Genesis where where two different offspring of one person are in conflict?
No.
And they represent two different ways of approaching God and each other? The entire rest of the book of Genesis is nothing more about the war between offspring.
Yeah.
Right? The first story next is Cain and Abel. Two seeds, but they're one seed because they come from the first couple or the representative couple, but they represent two seeds, the seed of the serpent and the seed of God, Yahweh, right? So seed here can function as physical descendants. And we have all sorts of examples, right? Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers. I mean, Genesis, just read them with this in view. You get nothing but seed that is in conflict with each other, right? That's literally the whole book. And then when you get into Exodus, then you get literally the seed of Shem, the seed of Ham. You get all of these nations now in conflict with each other. It's mind-blowing how this is set up. So on the one hand, seed can mean offspring. And it does. Cain and Abel, we're going to look at this. Or even Nephilim, we get to their seed, like, oh my Lord, that's a whole thing that's happening. But seed can also reference who you are in the image of. So you could be the seed of the serpent without being the offspring of the serpent by imaging the serpent. You could be the seed of Yahweh, even if you're not the physical descendant of Yahweh, by imaging Yahweh and resisting the serpent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's a very physical interpretation of seed that you trace through all of the genealogies to get all of this conflict. Noah's sons, right? Noah's seed is conflict. I mean, it's just crazy. But seed also gets broadened out to include the moral choices that you make, whether you're imaging the serpent, which means giving into the serpent's temptation to define good and evil for yourself, or you're imaging the creator God. And so
there's like a biological track and like an adoptive track.
Exactly right. Well said. The biological track is actually, it gets fleshed out in Genesis, most notably in Genesis 6 with Nephilim, because there is literally the seed of the sons of God, which is a whole thing we'll get into. But there are two things happening that I want to draw your attention to out of this. All right, the first is when you encounter the rest of Genesis, the question that you're asking is that, okay, there will be a singular he who will image God and resist the serpent. And so we keep coming into these patriarchs. We're like, oh yeah, Abraham, dude, he's got to be the he, right? God called him and took him to the promised land and made a promise to him. His seed, out of his seed will come one who will bless the earth. Well, maybe it's Abram that's the seed. Well, then Abraham, lies about his wife and the whole Hagar scenario, mistreats. I mean, you have a whole bunch of sin. You realize, oh, no, Abraham, oh, he's imaged the serpent. He's not the he. Well, what about his sons? What about Isaac? Well, Isaac, the son of the promise. Well, Isaac sells out his wife the same way his old man did. And we realize, even in Isaac's seed, there's this division between Jacob and Esau. So Isaac's not the he. Jacob and Esau, are they the he? I mean, God even says to Jacob, from your line, even though Jacob's the most ridiculous schemer and, liar and manipulator. Well, Jacob's not the he. And so you just are left with this burning question out of Genesis. Well, who's the he that's going to step and crush the serpent? Who's going to image God the way that Adam and Eve did not, and the way that Abraham and Sarah did not, and Isaac and Rebekah did not, right? Who's the he that's going to do this? And you get to David, and this is where we're going to pick up next week. David's the he. Everyone's betting on the fact that David's the he. And we'll end with just that tease that David's got to be the he. David's got to be the he. God even says, this is a man after my own heart. So what Genesis 3 does, at least in this section, it relates to us the story of a spiritual being who went from a place of exaltation to humiliation, using imagery that was totally at home in the ancient world.
Right.
Secondly, it set us up to ask the question, well, there's got to be a he that's coming, and the he will image God rightly and not say yes to the serpent's temptations. No, now, so why does Jesus get tempted? Like literally the first thing when he starts his public ministry. I mean, this is all setting up, hey, Jesus is the he. Jesus right here, he's the he. All the other he's failed. Jesus is the he. But it's doing it so brilliantly because the issue isn't, oh my goodness, we have to get all of these human beings into heaven because their souls are corrupted. The issue is the humans are no longer imaging God, right? They're imaging the serpent into the world. And so in some ways they're held captive to the serpent. And my goodness, Paul says this 1,000 different ways. He calls them powers and principalities. That's what he calls these spiritual beings, powers and principalities. And they hold humanity in captivity. And think about how this works. Literally, the Garden of Eden story ends and we meet Cain and Abel. And notice the temptation that sits before Cain. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry that I didn't accept your sacrifice? And there are all sorts of thought about why God didn't. Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now, here's the first introduction of the word sin. And it's fascinating because sin here is presented as something that is crouching and something that is desiring, and it's something that can master you. So, how has the serpent taken shape outside of the garden? Well, here it's personified as an animal, sin, seeking to devour. And it's interesting, Peter uses this image, when he talks about the enemy is a crouching lion looking for someone to devour.
Yeah.
So now we've got a world, all right? We haven't even gotten to the humans being kicked out yet, but now we've got a world that was intended to be managed by image bearers who imaged Yahweh, Yahweh's wisdom, Yahweh's goodness, Yahweh's intention and intelligence into the created world. But it's been hijacked and usurped because now the image bearers are imaging a created thing rather than the creator. This is Paul in Romans 1. We'll get Gambas on to talk about this, but this is when Paul's doing all of that, like God gave them over, God gave them over, God gave them over. This is what it's talking about. Mm-hmm. That God cast the serpent down, and the serpent was now roaming around life outside the garden, crouching and devouring and tempting Cain. That's the point. It's the same choice. Do you trust your wisdom or the wisdom of the serpent? And Cain, of course, makes the wrong choice. And then he has a whole offspring tree that turns into a city, and that city turns into Babylon at one point. So, I mean, it's like, oh my goodness, all of this stuff is being set up for us. Even Paul's personification of sin and death in Romans 5, when he talks about sin and death as cosmic actors who desire, this is where this is first introduced. So sin isn't first introduced as hey guys, you were perfect and you blew it.
Right.
Sin is first introduced as something that has tempted the human population into disobedience. And as a result, the humans are no longer imaging. So God has to deal with two issues. Number one, God no longer has a people who image him, which is what his intention was. And God has a serpent who is tempting the humans into that failure of vocation.
Yeah.
So when you get to the Gospels, what's Jesus doing the whole time in the beginning of his ministry? He's casting out demons, and he's saying, I'm binding the strong man.
Yeah.
Right? And he's also perfectly imaging what it means to resist the serpent.
And I've asked that question so many times on here in different contexts of what did it mean? Did Jesus experience the same temptations as all of us, whether it was, lust or whatever, but was modeling how to not give into temptation and to navigate that this is how you can do it. And if the temptation of the desert isn't just if that's not part of that, like no, he's hitting the same marks that a lot of us go through and modeling, look, and using scripture to do so. This is how you image. This is how imaging correctly subverts temptation, rather than just saying like, just don't do it, guys.
But this is a whole different, operating at a whole different level than my personal temptation to lust or to totally greedy.
But I feel like I've been thinking about that a lot with how, and this is what I kept asking for with the human series, right? It was like, there's a humanity to Jesus that we don't understand. We rely on the deity of Jesus, but the humanity seems to be a obviously very important piece of the puzzle. But I grew up not.
But here's why. This is why. It's in his humanness, he shows us.
That's what I mean.
How to resist. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I think
that's why hold on.
Miss.
It is a huge miss. And that's why Dallas Willard, D. Willie, talked about vampire Christians who are only interested in his blood and death.
Right. Yeah.
And why his life matters. Because in responding to evil, in handling persecution, he was imaging God. And so he opens up now the possibility through the union with him in his spirit of imaging God rightly.
I think that's really helpful, or for me, it's
Yes.
helpful at least. And man, that D. Willie quote came up in over coffee the other day, and then we just started talking about Midnight Mass, the show that we did the episode on, and
Oh.
just how genius that was allegorically, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, just so fun. I'm so curious about this enmity, the animosity,
Yeah.
especially with the genealogy that you just went through and how each of the women was used in that situation, and if
Yep.
any of
And
that
so
is at
notice.
play. And
Notice. Well, just notice. I mean, what is at issue here? The issue is childbirth. So how will, right, the command, the vocation given to the couple was fill the earth. Now, her seed, there'll be animosity between her seed and the serpent seed. So now childbirth there's something around childbirth. And so it's not surprising that in the next verse, we're going to read about childbirth and the woman.
I know there's certain things we just can't have answers to, and one of them is probably, maybe when we are made new or whatever, we will have some of these answers, or maybe we'll have some kind of insight into things. But this idea of the garden inside of Eden, inside the world at large, and the fact that there may have been or likely were other people.
Yeah.
And so what was God doing with this model couple amidst other people? What was the role of the powers and the principalities prior to a serpent fall? Or was the fall prior to Eden?
Yeah.
Like, it's just like they feel like kind of superfluous questions, but at the same time, they also feel kind of like, well, these could be tangents that are important to understanding what it is that God is doing here.
Excuse me. Yeah, and I don't think we know. I think one hint we get is that Adam and Eve are referred to lots of different ways in the New Testament. And this is really confusing. This is why the Adam and Eve discussions get so hijacked.
Yeah.
Adam and Eve are referred to as literal people, but they're also referred to as archetypes.
Right.
So they're called human and living one, human and life. So of course they're archetypes. They're also, at least for Adam is an antitype. So he is a negative archetype as opposed to Christ. So you're either in Adam or in Christ. So they're referred to as little people. They're referred to as archetypes. They're referred to as antitypes. And then they're referred to as representative humans. Right. And the word archetype literally means what's true of them is true of all humanity. So I think what we're getting, and this is my personal opinion, not scholarly in any way, I think what we're getting is all of this happening at once.
Okay.
And so I do think human, in the same way that God had a relationship with Israel and the nations outside of the priesthood, but he had selected a seed, right? The seed of Aaron to be the priesthood. I think God had relationships with humans all around outside the garden and was desirous of their flourishing. And part of so the Eden, if this is a picture of what he's going to do in the temple and what he's going to do in the tabernacle, which is select out of humanity, right, a smaller group, a subset for the blessing of the larger set. Then we see this in Adam and Eve. But then when we look at tabernacle and temple, God was still in the midst of all of those people and caring for them, right? But the point, and if we ever do a predestination series of conversations, the point of their election, whether it was Adam and Eve or Abraham and Sarah or the tribe of Levites or the high priest or whatever, the point of their election was always to bring blessings to those who were outside. And so I think what we're seeing is because Adam and Eve are historical people, they're symbolic and metaphorical, they're archetypes, they're representative types. I think all of that's happening at once, and it's brilliant. Layers. So many layers, and the New Testament appeals to all of those layers.
Do you in that context, do you read the be fruitful and multiply differently?
I read, yes, be fruitful, multiply differently. But remember, the animals were commanded to be fruitful and multiply. So what I see the command there is not as reproducing, but I see the command as an expression of their rule. Perfect. So the command to be fruitful and multiply, that was given to animals too. The command to rule was the unique command given to humans. And we talked about this before, right? If you're an infertile couple, you're still imaging God and ruling, right? If you're a single parent, blah, 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 blah. I mean, like if you're not living the cultural ideal, that has nothing to do with your image bearing. You're still imaging. And Paul will take that and say, the way you do that is through community, and the community you do that through is the church.
Yeah. And I think the illustration you gave with Aaron and so on and so forth is helpful with that. Because, I mean, we grew up with be fruitful and multiply because there was only 2 human beings on the planet. And so to get to a point where there's 8 billion people on the planet, we had to like really be fruitful.
Yeah.
But if that's not, if there is a population, then maybe that carries a different significance for what the archetypal folks were supposed to do in the world at large. Does that make sense? Like,
Yep.
It's just interesting. It just kind of it puts a few more shades of light on it that maybe this was a little bit of a different command than just, hey, get busy and, we need this is a big planet. We need some more people on it.
Yeah.
Rather, hey, we're piloting something a little interesting here that I would like you to bring out. Or whatever.
Exactly. It's all about it's a picture of God loading everything with potential.
Yeah.
And then allowing us to direct the potential. That's the picture I get from Fill the Earth and Subdue It. Yeah. So, anywho, man, we've covered some ground today, Stafford. Timestamp it, baby. And this is why, I mean, we joke around the 65-part series, but I don't know. There's so much here, dude. So much.
Yeah. And this is the beginning for a reason. Dude. But everything you're tying with all those things that Paul was echoing, again, just to show that thread that we're not dealing with different subject matter here from one testament to the next. It's
as the Bible Project says so beautifully, it's one unified story culminating in Jesus. Mm-hmm. But it's operating on multiple levels. And so when you get to Jesus and you just pick out one of those levels, like Jesus forgives sin, absolutely true. Hallelujah. So needed. But that's one of many levels that the work of Jesus is doing.
Like Wayne's World.
Yeah. We're not worthy. Anyway, we are not worthy. We'll end on that. All right. So next episode, unless something big happens, serpents, David, Jesus. There we go. Hey, love you guys. Thanks so much for putting up with us. We're still pleasantly surprised that people download this and listen. So thanks for surprising us every week. We love that. Bye.
Bye.